Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 281, Setup. Longer than Luffy stood his ground. His expression was contemptuous, not even sparing a glance at his former pursuers. He continued, "If I wanted to run, could these losers even keep up with me?" At his words, the woman's face changed, momentarily losing her composure. But she quickly glanced sideways, noting the many people surrounding her. Regaining control and clearly annoyed by her brief lapse, she snapped. "Longer than Luffy, today I've brought over 6,000 people to surround you. Think you can grow wings and fly away? When we catch you, I'll see exactly what's so long about you. I've seen all sizes before, I bet you're just a toothpick. Go get him, take him alive." Without offering any explanation, the woman immediately ordered the attack. Ethan, watching from the sidelines, almost cursed aloud. They just started fighting without saying a word? Couldn't they at least explain what the grudge was before throwing hands? Still, this woman's language was incredibly brazen. All sizes? She'd seen them all? Even the biggest guys? While Ethan was still contemplating in his mind, the enemy force began to move. The melee fighters from the Necromantic Mages group, positioned at the front, charged toward Longer than Luffy. Meanwhile, the ranged classes on the perimeter remained still. They casually watched, since the order was to take him alive. If they started hurling spells, he wouldn't survive a single concentrated wave. Meanwhile, the surrounded hunter calmly unstrapped the axe from his back. Facing the group of melee fighters, he stood fearlessly. At the front, shield tanks moved to form a cylindrical encirclement, aiming to trap Longer than Luffy. Seeing this, Ethan thought, even I'd have trouble escaping if I were surrounded by a group of shield tanks. Yet this guy was just standing there, letting them close in. Had he given up, or was he hiding something? "Hey, capture me alive? You think I've been leading these dogs in circles for no reason?" At those words, the female necromantic mage froze. Even Ethan didn't understand what he meant. But Longer than Luffy continued with a smirk. "I thought you'd bring more people, but heh, this will be painful enough for you." His eyes narrowed. He raised a finger and pointed. "Delayed detonation, blast." As the words left his mouth, Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. A sense of imminent danger swept through him. In stealth, the Black Panthers first stood on end. Abandoning any attempt to hide, Ethan immediately transformed into bear form and activated Iron Hide, charging toward Longer than Luffy's position. His instincts screamed that it was the safest spot. Just as he took his first step, the ground around them rumbled. Energy surged through the air as countless traps detonated. Freezing traps, frost traps, fire traps, high explosive traps, poison traps, smoke traps, and more. Ethan silently cursed. How many damn traps did this guy plant? How long had Longer than Luffy been circling the area before Ethan arrived? Countless overlapping traps covered a range of 200 to 300 meters. The sheer density left Ethan speechless. As he charged ahead, a high explosive trap detonated beneath his feet. -1. -186. 2 damage numbers floated into the air. Ethan was startled. He knew traps dealt dual damage, the first value based on the trap setter's attack power. That alone couldn't breach his defenses. But trap damage also included true damage. That explosion had taken 186 points from his health. And that was with his considerable Omni attribute, which reduced all damage, including true damage. It became clear to Ethan that the opponent's trap skill level was exceptionally high. He felt embarrassed. This guy. Ethan's skill levels were pathetically low. Most players probably had better ones by now. This was because he either one-shot monsters or took them down in 2 or 3 hits. His highest skill, Shred, was only level 9. His finishing moves? Level 1 or 2 at most. But now wasn't the time to dwell on it. The blast from the high explosive trap threw off his momentum and he stumbled straight into a nest of poison snake traps. Hiss, hiss, hiss. A cluster of red-skinned venomous snakes spat at him repeatedly. -1. -1. -1. -8. -8. -8. Dozens of small damage numbers floated above his head. The true damage was low and the poison effect was continuous, but Ethan chose not to use an antidote potion. The damage wasn't high enough to justify it. As he ran through the field, several snakes coiled around his bare legs. Because of his exclusive weapon, his transformed state was upright. He no longer walked on all fours. The power of Grey Throat gave him a form more akin to a werewolf. With each step, he broke free from the snakes, but they still slowed him down. Just those 2 traps alone had cost him over 500 health points. For other players, triggering them would mean instant death. He pushed forward, enduring over a dozen different trap effects, and finally closed in 10 meters from Longer than Luffy. By then, he had lost more than 5,000 health points. And that was just covering 40 meters. Looking back at the Necromantic Mages team, chaos had consumed them. Traps continued to detonate, exploding everywhere. In the short time it took Ethan to run that distance, the enemy's neat encirclement had collapsed into utter disarray. Nearly half of them were already down. Some had triggered frost traps and were struggling to move, shuffling in slow motion with panicked faces. Others were entangled in nests of venomous snakes, bundled up like yarn balls, getting bitten repeatedly. Some had been blown apart by high-explosive traps, limbs scattered through the air. Others ran around engulfed in flames, screaming after stepping on fire traps. The scene stunned Ethan. It looked like hell on earth. Miserable cries, angry curses, terrified roars, and sobs echoed in all directions. But what truly shocked Ethan wasn't the carnage, it was longer than Luffy himself. Survival hunter traps could be detonated with a delay? He'd never heard of that. Had this guy unlocked some hidden class? Ethan's suspicion made sense. Normally, survival hunter traps activated when someone stepped on them or entered their trigger zone. He'd also never seen anyone able to set this many traps at once. Chapter 282, Trap Aster. Ordinarily, a survival hunter's traps would vanish after a set duration. Standard mechanics. And if you placed a second trap of the same type, the first one disappeared auto-removed by the system. But Longer Than Luffy didn't play by those rules. He wasn't just delaying trap detonation, he could choose when they exploded. Even more absurd, he could deploy multiple of the same kind simultaneously. Given enough time, the guy could turn any area into a tactical nightmare. A kill zone laced with invisible death. Like a sapper from the old wars. Patient. Methodical. Devastating. Too bad he was with the Carnage faction. If he hadn't been, Ethan would have recruited him without hesitation. With someone like that on their side, fortresses would be impenetrable. Towns practically unbreachable. One man laying out a full defensive perimeter on his own? Hell, if he had time to prepare, he could hold an entire city. Solo. Of course, setup mattered. He'd need a good amount of time to work. But right now, Ethan's sudden appearance had drawn attention. The moment the group spotted him, they froze. What the hell kind of class is that? Werewolf? A hidden subclass? Something new. They didn't have time to process. A trap detonated beneath Ethan's feet and the shockwave tore through them. Agony, confusion, and panic followed. Stop moving. Don't run. The necromantic mage shrieked at her team, her voice sharp with panic. She thought her own people were triggering the traps through careless movement. But Ethan saw the truth in Longer Than Luffy's eyes. A smirk. Subtle but telling. This wasn't just time detonation. He could manually trigger specific traps while leaving others untouched. He was controlling the chaos. Damn. The guy wasn't just good, he was elite. A flicker of unease settled into Ethan's gut. True damage hurt. Even with his tankiness, it carved through his defenses like butter. And if someone stacked enough of it across their gear, well, even he wouldn't be laughing then. Not that many players could manage that kind of loadout. True damage builds were rare and expensive. Just then, Longer Than Luffy's gaze locked with Ethan's. The man tensed like a switch had flipped in his head. M182631. He blurted almost involuntarily. The hesitation cost him. A shield tank crashed into him with a precision block, disrupting his stance. Another rammed forward, using their shield to pin him in place. The necromantic mage snarled, "Kill him. Don't hold back." She was terrified now. Traps kept erupting. Her forces were getting shredded. Less than half remained and even they were in disarray. The only path to survival? Eliminate this guy. If they didn't, this kill box would become their grave. But Ethan wasn't moving. He was stuck frozen on that string of numbers. The others hadn't understood. But he had. M182631. That had been his old designation. Back in the 9th Division. Back in the real world. So who the hell was this guy? How did he recognize Ethan's ID even in this form? A second passed. Ethan made his choice. Doesn't matter who he is. I'm getting him out. At that moment, the trap master was the one trapped, shield tanks hemming him in, weapons rising, ready to end him. But Ethan knew their type. Shield tanks hit like wet noodles. Slow. Blunt. They weren't finishers. They wouldn't kill him outright. Not immediately. Fuck you, bitch. Eat this, boom. K.A. blam. The ground under Ethan, once stable, erupted in fire. The explosion didn't stop there. It kicked off a brutal chain reaction, detonating trap after trap. And just before the blast swallowed them all, Longer Than Luffy mouthed something. A word. Maybe two. In that instant, Ethan swapped his Demon Hunter's Bone Fong necklace for the Blazing necklace, completing the set bonus. Skill activated, Blazing Defense. For the next 8 seconds, all damage taken would be reduced by 20% and he'd survive a fatal hit with full HP restored. Cooldown, 3 days. Then the world vanished in a flood of light. The explosion hurled Ethan backward like a rag doll, the shockwave slamming into him with terrifying force. System alert, you have died. Death immunity activated. When his vision returned, the silence was deafening. Too fast. Too total. That maniac had detonated everything, every single trap in the zone. No bodies. No survivors. Just scorched terrain. A blackened void where thousands had stood moments earlier. Including Longer Than Luffy. An A for Ethan? He'd also died for the first time since his rebirth. Sure, the immunity had kicked in. No penalties, no lost gear, no downtime. Just a 3-day cooldown. But it meant something. A line had been crossed, he wasn't untouchable. Ethereal was a world of limitless potential. A place of boundless power waiting to be seized. But now he understood power didn't make you immortal. Even with plus 30 enhancements. Even with divine abilities, someone, somewhere, could still punch your ticket. Without the blazing set's death immunity, he'd be waking up at a graveyard spawn right now. And the real question was, which graveyard? If he respawned in Survivor faction territory, great. He'd be fine. But if the system placed him inside Carnage-controlled lands? That'd be a disaster. Their graveyards were buried deep within cities and strongholds. If it was a low-level village, maybe he'd have a shot. But if he ended up in a high-tier zone? Main city? He wouldn't last 5 minutes. NPC guards would dogpile him. Camp his body. Cut him down again and again until he hit level 0. And what about the respawn mechanics here? Survivors could usually corpse run. Carnage players? They got teleported straight to the graveyard. Here, graveyards were technically safe zones. No NPCs inside. But step 1 foot outside? Enemy central. Whatever the case, Ethan wasn't about to find out the hard way. The battlefield lay still now. Charred. Dead and quiet. And as the inferno had consumed the area longer than Luffy had mouthed something to him. Ethan hadn't heard it, but he'd read the lips clearly. North Town. Then the flames took him. A rendezvous point. That had to be it. Ethan didn't know who this guy really was, not yet. But he knew one thing for sure, he had questions. Well, that was for later. Right now he had to loot. His eyes snapped to the glittering field of gear around him. Thousands of items. Gold tier, for the most part endgame stuff. Ethan almost laughed. Sure, half of it was locked to Carnage faction, but who cared? Gold was gold. And gold was universal. He could sell it to survivors. He could offload it to black market Carnage traders. Didn't matter. Profit was profit. Chapter 283, Loot Frenzy. Ethan first grabbed an axe lying in the central area. Judging by its shape, it belonged to Longer Than Luffy. A dark gold tier grade axe restricted to Carnage faction use. Even if it weren't restricted, no class on the survivor side could wield it. Human warriors lacked axe specialization skills. This type of axe was only usable by Carnage faction classes like warriors and survival hunters. Most players who rolled warrior here chose the berserker race. At the same time, he picked up a piece of parchment. The writing on it was jagged and chaotic, like a centipede had crawled across it. Ethan couldn't read it. He tossed it into his bag for later study. Something told him this war might have been sparked by this very item. And now it had fallen right into his hands. His arms ached from looting. His current setup was 4 32-slot high-tier bags. Aside from supplies, he'd already stuffed 6 dark gold tier pieces inside, with the rest being various gold tier gear. The ground was still littered with a sea of golden glimmers. Ethan's heart ached. What to do when you're out of space? Then he remembered back when he was testing whether bound gear could be transferred between his main and alt. He'd somehow directly accessed the alt's inventory and moved items over. At the time, it had been an absent-minded experiment. Now recalling it. A grin spread across Ethan's face. He opened his alt's inventory and found it packed with low-tier copper ore. A few of the ores gleamed brilliantly, the mark of premium quality. Given his alt's current mining skill, copper was all it could extract. But even premium copper ore sold for a hefty price. He tried moving gear from his main inventory into the alt's. A second later, Ethan nearly laughed out loud. Markham had a spatial storage bag in real life. Now, in game, he'd essentially created a remote mobile warehouse. This was beyond convenient. He'd forgotten to ask Markham where to get one of those spatial bags during their meal. Next time they met, he had to ask. That thing was a game changer. Ethan began dumping gear into the alt's inventory without restraint. Then he switched control to the alt, activated a teleport stone, and returned to the guild stronghold to find Celia. Celia didn't know that Not a Rogue was Ethan's alt. He told her it was his brother. Though unfamiliar with his personal life, she'd been curious. Since when did he have a sibling? She'd never seen him in reality, but she didn't pry. When the alt approached her, she greeted it warmly. Without a word, the alt began unloading an endless stream of gear onto the ground, much to her shock. Of course, it was Ethan continuously funneling loot into the alt's inventory from afar. Both sides worked in seamless tandem. But the sheer volume of items was overwhelming. After over 10 minutes, he'd only collected half of the 6,000 to 7,000 players' dropped gear. Then, movement at the edges of his vision. During his looting spree, he spotted players rushing toward the area. The earlier commotion must have drawn attention, or maybe word had spread. Such a massive player slaughter meant treasure ripe for the taking. These were the scavengers. In Ethereal, monster drops would vanish after 1 day if left unclaimed, resetting after the next maintenance. But player deaths? The respawn timer for dropped gear varied by tier. The lowest tier common iron gear took 3 days to upon. Bronze tier lasted 6 days. Silver tier vanished after 12. Gold tier lasted a full 24 days. Dark gold tier gear lingered for nearly 2 months before the system wiped it clean. But divine tier and legendary tier items, whether dropped by monsters or players, never disappeared. In the distance, players swarmed like ants, sprinting toward the battlefield. They spotted Ethan first, already scavenging the spoils, alone and conspicuous amidst the carnage. The sight of gold-glinting loot scattered across the ground made them push harder, legs pumping as if they could will themselves faster. Ethan's gaze swept over the remaining unclaimed gear. He had to abandon it. The alternative? Slaughter every scavenger in sight. Not only would that waste time, but more would keep coming. Worse, killing here would alert the Carnage faction. Him, the druid god, a survivor, standing in their territory. That would complicate everything. Transform, panther form. Stealth. In an instant, he vanished from sight. Simultaneously, he directed his ult to instruct Celia, store these. Not the guild vault. I'll come retrieve them later. Celia stared, baffled. Just how big was Ethan's brother's inventory? Hadn't he gone mining? Yet here he was, dumping 3,000 pieces of gear in one go. Most restricted to Carnage faction use, no less. Where had he gotten it all? The ult delivered its message, then Ethan sent it back to the mines. Celia, still wide-eyed, called for reinforcements, Skyblade, Slashblade, and Seraph Warrior. They'd help sort and catalog the horde. Ethan's brother had insisted on secrecy, and tackling this mountain alone would take forever. Skyblade arrived first, then Slashblade, Seraph Warrior trailed behind. All three froze at the sight. A sea of gold tier gear? When Celia explained it was from Ethan's brother, they each exchanged knowing looks. Of course. Ethan himself was a walking enigma, appearing only to drop jaws before vanishing again. Now his brother was pulling the same stunts. That inventory alone was worth a fortune. 3,000 items, a single haul. The largest known bag in Ethereal held 84 slots. It had sold for a staggering 12,000 gold in the Eastern Frontier, snapped up by some tycoon. Even with gold's depreciating exchange rate, 1 gold equals $1,000, that totaled 12 million in cash. Back then, people had mocked the buyer, who blows that much on a backpack? But compared to Ethan's brother? That tycoon might as well be panhandling. This was true extravagance. If Ethan knew their thoughts, he'd cringe. After all, his alt's inventory was just 4 16-slot bags. But Ethan remained oblivious. Orienting himself, he headed due north, unaware of the legend brewing in his wake. Chapter 284, The Border Crossing. Ethan knew the surrounding area fairly well, every ridge and hollow carved into his memory from countless hours spent grinding. In his past life, to complete the notorious quest for 1,000 Titanite shards, he'd spent a considerable amount of time deep in Carnage faction territory, dodging both monsters and rival players alike. The abandoned mines nearby were where he had once dug for those very shards. Not far from the mines lay a small town, likely the same one longer than Luffy had mentioned, the settlement to the north. Pressing for time, Ethan shifted into stag form and bolted forward, hoofs pounding against the earth. With no scenery worth admiring and the stag's limited vision compared to panther form, he mostly kept his eyes shut, relying on instinct to avoid obstacles. Every so often he'd switch to panther form just long enough to reorient himself, ensuring he didn't slam into anything. The landscape blurred past him in seamless motion. Soon, sensing he was close, he shifted back into panther form and spotted the faint outline of a town to his left. His path had veered slightly, but not enough to matter. Adjusting his direction once more, he crept toward the settlement in stealth, stopping just outside the guards' detection range. He didn't dare go further. Though this was no high-level village, the guards were still level 55 elites. If he stepped into their alert radius, even going into stealth wouldn't save him. Individually, a level 55 elite posed no real threat, but numbers changed everything. The moment one guard spotted him, the system would trigger a full-scale defense response. Attacking a Carnage faction town as a survivor player would activate the highest-tier security protocols. Reinforcements would pour in from neighboring settlements, and swarms of players would rush to join the fight. Given the Carnage faction's bloodthirsty nature, they'd throw themselves at him without hesitation. Ethan wasn't sure how to contact longer than Luffy. Cross-faction restrictions blocked friend requests, and private messages were impossible. Just as he was weighing his options, a familiar figure appeared near the town's entrance, lingering within the safety of the no-combat zone. Ethan's eyes sharpened. It was longer than Luffy, but trailing behind him were several others, their guild emblems bearing a hound's insignia. The same group that had ambushed him earlier. Ethan grimaced. There was no way longer than Luffy would leave town now, at least not openly. Not with those vultures shadowing his every move. The moment he stepped beyond the safe zone, they'd pounce. That left only one option. Ethan had to go in. Scanning the area, he spotted a large boulder nearby. Moving stealthily, he swapped out his blazing necklace for the Demon Hunter's Bone Fang necklace and activated its secondary ability. Attribute 2, temporarily transforms the wearer into a Carnage faction player. Duration, 30 minutes. Can be dispelled at will. Cooldown, 1 hour. A quick check of his status confirmed the change. Faction, Carnage. Even his class had shifted. Class, Shadowstalker. A rare hidden class for the Carnage side, he guessed. They didn't have druids here. Shadowstalker was the only shape-shifting option available. The Demon Hunter's Bone Fang necklace had come from a monster of the same race, Demon Hunters. Players couldn't choose that race, it was NPC exclusive. That meant Ethan, while using the necklace, was effectively a special class within Carnage faction. Probably the system's way of masking his true nature. Because if he shifted openly, everyone would know he was a druid. But as a Shadowstalker, his transformed state took the form of a violet-black shadow sabertooth, the only shape available to them. Ethan tested it. No matter what he tried to shift into, as long as it wasn't human form, he ended up as the same saber-tooth. Satisfied, he strode out from behind the boulder. At the town entrance, just outside the guard's alert radius, he hesitated. Then carefully, he stepped 1 foot past the invisible boundary. Right at that moment, guard glanced at him, then ignored him completely. Relieved, Ethan moved toward the gates. Inside, Longer Than Luffy had planted himself in a chair by the roadside, lazily chewing on an apple while smirking at the spies watching him from a distance. The sheer arrogance in his expression, the way he took slow, deliberate bites, it was practically begging for a punch. Ethan entered the town. Torches lined the streets, casting everything in a dim, flickering amber glow that danced across cracked stone and shuttered windows. It was a far cry from the purity of sunlight, but still leagues better than the oppressive, suffocating darkness that blanketed the land outside the walls. Beyond the town, without a torch or gear stacked with dark vision, you couldn't even see your own hand in front of your face. Here, at least, you could make out shapes. Ethan approached Longer Than Luffy, who was still too busy taunting his watchers to notice him. Then, a shadow fell over the man's face, blocking the torchlight. Longer Than Luffy blinked, turning to squint at Ethan. M1-82631. Ethan's low murmur made Longer Than Luffy freeze. The man stood abruptly, chair vanishing into his inventory. And with a subtle jerk of his chin, he signaled Ethan to follow and started walking deeper into town. Their tails, the same group from before, immediately trailed after them, already relaying the encounter to their superiors. Who the hell is that? In a dim-lit room, a woman scowled at the report. Beside her, a hulking berserker shaman, a Carnage-exclusive class, just as survivors had paladins, leaned back with an amused smirk. If Ethan had been there, he'd have recognized her instantly, the necromantic mage from before. Told you, the shaman said, tapping his temple. With him, you gotta use this. Not brute force. The woman's glare could have melted steel. Oh, like your brilliant plan worked? I even tried seducing him, you bastard. The shaman choked on his drink, some foul-looking crimson liquid. Seduce? You threatened to skin him alive if he didn't cooperate. That's not seduction, that's... Her murderous stare shut him up. He took another sip, wisely deciding silence was safer. Seeing his reaction, the woman exhaled sharply, turning her attention back to the streets below. Chapter 285, Rules of the Game. Ethan followed Longer Than Luffy down 2 streets. They turned twice before ducking into a tavern where they booked a private booth and stepped inside. Only then did Longer Than Luffy finally speak. How did you get to Carnage FAC? Ethan cut him off sharply. Some things are under system surveillance. Don't say it out loud. Longer Than Luffy blinked, confused. He didn't understand why Ethan was being so cautious. But Ethan knew better. He'd seen firsthand what happened to those who underestimated the system's watchful eye, and he had no intention of repeating their mistakes. Survivor faction and Carnage faction players couldn't share secrets between factions. And they definitely couldn't trade. If the system flagged a cross-faction transaction, you'd be wiped back to level 0 on the spot. Your EXP gains would tank, chat functions would be locked, trades completely frozen, and your city reputation would be nuked into the negatives so hard you'd never recover. In other words, your account would be bricked. And you couldn't even delete it and start over. In his past life, Ethan had seen it happen. A Survivor faction player sold a ring to a Carnage faction member. Both players were instantly reset to level 0, their EXP gains were slashed by 50%. Every system function was disabled for 365 days, no talking, no party invites, no trading, no guilds. The punishment was brutal, designed not just to penalize, but to humiliate and isolate you from the rest of the game's community. Longer Than Luffy might not get the whole system surveillance thing, but he wasn't stupid. He knew some lines couldn't be crossed or even mentioned between factions. So he switched gears. Where are you now? Made it to Silverwood territory yet? Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who the hell are you? The man grinned. Name's Emery Shaw. When Ethan's frown deepened, he chuckled and added, probably doesn't ring a bell. But you chased me from Ember City to the outskirts. And nearly caved my skull in. That you remember. Ethan's head snapped up. He shot to his feet, glaring down at the man, voice low and dangerous. You. Me. Emery leaned back, grinning. Nothing like the ragged mess Ethan had met before. Back at the den's entrance in Ember City, the guy had been wearing flip-flops, ratty red shorts, and no shirt. The guy's bizarre getup had been impossible for Ethan to forget. And now, seeing his in-game ID, Longer Than Luffy, paired with his real-life ability to stretch his limbs like some kind of rubber man. It reminded Ethan of an old cartoon he'd watched as a kid. As the memories flickered through his mind, Emery leaned forward with a grin. Come on, no need to look at me like I'm about to stab you. Ethan snorted. Should I look at you like a friend instead? We could be friends, Emery shot back, seizing the opening. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Oddly enough, he didn't sense any trace of hostility from the guy. Then he remembered his old suspicion that Emery had been rescued by Celeste back then. Was he like her? Another plant? But that wasn't something he could just ask. Not without risking Celeste's cover. Emery watched Ethan's silence with amusement. Celeste told me you were sharp, he said finally. Said if I ever ran into you, I could trust you. Also said you'd never believe me though. He trailed off, deliberately leaving space for Ethan to bite. Ethan didn't take the bait. Just stared, unblinking. Emery sighed, equal parts frustrated and impressed. Yeah, she wasn't wrong. You're a brick wall. He rubbed his neck. All right, fine. She gave me two things to say, proof you'd actually listen. First, a duel's a duel. No holding back. Ethan's eyebrow twitched. That phrase, whispered in his ear during a sparring session, had been between him and Celeste alone. Emery smirked at his reaction and kept going. Second, you beat the hell out of her on the road back to Ember City in that Predator Beast X of yours. Just the 3 military guys and Lila in the car. First hit was a kick to her right cheek. Then you punched her left tit so hard it swelled up for days. Ethan held up a hand. Enough. He believed him now. Those details? No faction spy could have dug them up. And as for that sparring phrase, Celeste would have had to say it herself. Otherwise, there was no way anyone else could have known. And what happened inside the Predator Beast X, Ethan losing control and beating Celeste? The people present would never betray her. If Leo, Victor, or Williams had sold Celeste out, her cover would have been blown long ago. And besides, the fact that her left breast had swollen up as a result of his punch, only 2 people knew about that, Ethan and Celeste. Not even Lila was aware. All right, enough, Ethan cut in, his expression twisting. He hadn't expected Celeste to share that detail with Emery. She must have been desperate for me to trust him. How is she? Ethan asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Despite everything, the schemes, the mind games, he still worried about her. Most of her actions back then had been the result of dissenters' brainwashing, warping her into something she wasn't. At the question, Emery's face darkened. She's? He shook his head. Under internal review. Officially, she's possessing Celeste's body. Only we know Do is dead. That she's still herself. Ethan frowned. Then why the hell does she need reviewing? Emery's jaw tightened. Review is just a nice word for torture. Tests. Experiments. The shit they're putting her through. A flicker of genuine fear passed through his eyes. Ethan didn't need details. The look said enough. Emery exhaled sharply, shaking off the thought. Forget it. That's not why I'm here. I went to Harmony City last week and I was supposed to meet you. Staked out your place for days. But you never showed. Heard you left town. I figured you'd already started moving, so I came back. You're at Silverwood Hidden Territory now, right? Ethan gave a single nod. Chapter 286, The Gathering Storm. Emery let out a long breath after receiving Ethan's reply. Good, he said, visibly relaxing. Otherwise, I wouldn't know how to explain things to Celeste. Ethan understood now. Celeste had probably tasked Emery with bringing him into Silverwood family's hidden territory. The realization warmed Ethan's chest. His senior, his captain. She really did look out for him. That old bastard from the Silverwoods isn't someone to underestimate. Be careful, Emery suddenly warned, his tone grim. HM? What do you know? Ethan caught the implication in his words. Not much, Emery admitted, shaking his head with a frown. But the higher-ups are investigating. Lately, he's been meeting with various powerful families and societies more frequently. Probably scheming something. Ethan's expression darkened at that. The lack of concrete information was frustrating. But Emery's next words gave Ethan a lead. Recently, Liam Silverwood had someone sell a batch of materials on the black market, Emery said. Based on our intel, those materials were meant for setting up a formation. He went through multiple intermediaries, but everything ended up being transported into Silverwood's hidden territory. Thought he was being discreet, but he underestimated our intelligence network. Ethan frowned. What kind of materials? And what formation? No idea. Hold on, Emery abruptly logged off. A short while later, he reappeared and listed off a series of obscure names. Venom Teal, Holy Fire Gems, Pale Moon's Oil, Blaze Heart Crystals, Black Frost Vines, Soul Wither, Ore. And more, all materials Ethan had never heard of before. Still, he committed each one to memory. At the same time, he tried reaching out to Morzin in his mind, hoping the old man could analyze what kind of formation these materials were meant for. But as usual, there was no response. Morzin not answering him was nothing new. Either asleep, drinking, or passed out drunk. That was the impression Ethan had of him. Little did he know Morzin had actually been sober for days. Instead, he'd been using Ethan's avatar to pass the time. More importantly, since Ethan couldn't log into the game, Morzin had been quietly leveling up for him. It was the safest way he could help without overstepping. After their last argument, Morzin had nearly let his old temper flare up. But in the end, the old man was still an old man. He cooled down and chose the safer path. Ethan just didn't know it yet. Once Emery finished listing all the materials the Silverwoods had acquired, he added, if possible, you should stay hidden inside the territory and avoid coming out. Ethan stiffened. Are the dissenters making a move against me? Emery nodded. Once Celeste's investigation wraps up, the first order she'll likely receive is to eliminate everyone in Ember City's M Squad. If you can get them out, do it. If not, just save yourself. The current Celeste, she's terrifying. That pet of hers is downright monstrous. Emery's expression darkened as he spoke, as if recalling a close encounter with the abyssal dragon. Ethan lowered his head, his eyes flashing with defiance and murderous intent. So they were targeting the people around him now? Leo, Victor, Williams, Celia, even their families could be in danger. The 9th Division, the dissenters, they were his biggest threats. If he could wipe them out completely, would that finally bring safety? Ethan turned the thoughts over in his mind, his jaw tightening. So that's why. All this time he hadn't faced any direct harassment. because the higher-ups among the dissenters had been planning this all along. Eliminating M Squad was probably meant to be Celeste's final test, a brutal initiation into their ranks. Now he had two options. First, find a safe place to hide and take Leo and the others with him. Get them out before the axe fell. Second, annihilate the dissenters within the 9th Division entirely. There was, technically, a third option, but Ethan held no illusions about its feasibility. Seeking help from the originalists within the 9th Division. But he knew better. Right now, he couldn't even get close to anyone from the originalist faction. The only two connections he had were Celeste and Emery, both deep in enemy territory. Ethan started to ask Emery if he could arrange a meeting with the so-called Director Vaughn, the elusive leader of the originalists. A man who existed only in Celeste's stories, never in person. Not that Ethan expected otherwise. The highest-ranking figure in the 9th Division wasn't someone you could just casually meet. Though, for a supreme leader, Vaughn seemed remarkably ineffective. Under his so-called leadership, the 9th Division had fractured into chaos. Originalists. Dissenters. Unaligned. What kind of joke was this? The realization that his friends were in imminent danger soured Ethan's mood entirely. In his mind, he cursed Vaughn viciously. Just as he had begun to voice his question, barely a few words in, Emery cut him off, his voice firm and final. No. What the? I didn't even finish. Ethan blinked. I know what you were going to ask, Emery said, his expression unreadable. Celeste and I can't contact any of the 9th Division's elder figures unless it's absolutely critical. As for why, you should understand. Ethan's brows shot up. Understand? My friends are about to be hunted down and I'm supposed to understand. Emery barked a laugh, shaking his head. Celeste was right. Your biggest weakness is how much you care. He looked almost amused, as if he'd stumbled upon some grand irony. Ethan's glare could have cut steel. Emery wiped imaginary tears from his eyes, still grinning. Anyway, I've given you the warning. What you do with it is up to you. They spoke for a while longer, but as they prepared to part ways, Emery paused at the door. His tone shifted, turning uncharacteristically solemn. The originalists cannot fall. The future of humanity depends on it. His eyes locked onto Ethan's. No matter what happens, Celeste and I will always prioritize the 9th Division's survival above all else. A beat of silence. Then quieter, but your weakness makes you vulnerable. Someone will exploit it. He hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally he added, don't assume the originalists are all righteous either. There are players in this game you don't see yet. With that he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Ethan stared after him, the weight of the warning settling in his chest. For all his careless demeanor, Emery wasn't just a messenger. He was an ally, one bound by duty, but an ally nonetheless. And his words carried a truth Ethan couldn't ignore. Chapter 287, Shadow Pursuit? Inside the private booth, Ethan's disguise had already faded. These system-assigned booths were isolated spaces independent of the outside world. Since he hadn't been attacked and their conversation hadn't involved faction conflicts, no penalties were triggered. With a flick of his wrist, Ethan reactivated his disguise skill, the illusion settling over him like a second skin. Satisfied that his appearance was once again concealed, he pushed open the booth's door and stepped back into the dimly lit tavern. As he walked, Ethan mulled over Emery's final words. Though the man hadn't said it outright, the implication was clear: if Celeste received a mission to eliminate the remaining members of M Squad, she would do it. Would Celeste really kill them? The question lingered in Ethan's mind. As much as he doubted she'd turn on them, he wasn't about to sit around and find out. He ambled toward the city gates, seemingly unaware of the shadowy figures tailing him. Trying to follow me? Pathetic. Without even glancing back, Ethan activated stealth, vanishing from sight. The stalkers froze. Let's report back to the boss, one muttered. We lost the Shadowblade. Shadowblade, a Carnage faction class, nearly identical to Rogue's. Amusingly, Ethan stood less than 2 meters away, undetected. This guy's perception stat must be garbage. If I wanted him dead, he'd be a corpse already. But killing them would trigger a system alert revealing his identity. Since they were heading to meet their so-called boss, Ethan decided to follow. Let's see who's pulling the strings. That female necromantic mage from earlier? No way she was in charge. Compared to Marcus Skaner, she might as well have been brain-dead. Longer than Luffy had been testing his skills, standing in the open for hours like bait. Yet she charged in without a second thought. No guild affiliation, obvious trap, how did she not see it? The group didn't return to the city. Instead, they trudged westward, moving so slowly that Ethan's stealth-enhanced speed made trailing them tedious. Bored, he pulled out the parchment. Its jagged, indecipherable script made no sense. He tried returning it to Longer Than Luffy, but the man had only taken the axe back, leaving the parchment behind. To know what it is, he'd said. Found it in an uncharted zone. Nobody could read it, so I kept it. Then the apex predators caught wind of it. They'd hounded him, offering absurd sums. But given their history, he'd refused even as their relentless pursuit escalated. Ethan frowned. In my past life, I never heard of any legendary item being a damn parchment. No map, no clues, just scribbles. If this was a treasure map, it'd fool nobody. The group halted occasionally, engaging in random skirmishes with passers-by. Ethan's patience wore thin. They must have sent word ahead by now. Are they just wasting time, or actually heading to their boss? The clock ticked toward 4 a.m., barely a few hours left before Ethereal entered its resting period. If these idiots weren't leading him to their leader, this was a colossal waste of time. Just as he considered ditching them, the group abruptly picked up their pace, as if spurred by an order. Finally, Ethan's interest reignited. He shadowed them, his stealth rendering him a specter in the gloom. 30 minutes later, a flickering glow pierced the darkness ahead, torches, dozens of them, clustered like fireflies in the abyss. In the Shadow Realm, only a force large enough to defend itself would dare light flames. It was a taunt. Come at us. Target confirmed. Ethan abandoned his slow pursuit. He darted ahead, weaving through the terrain until the scene unfolded before him and his breath hitched. What the hell is this? A sea of players stretched into the distance, thousands strong, their ranks swelling by the minute. Guild insignias glinted under torchlight, a snarling hound emblem. Apex predators. Longer than Luffy had called them, a tier 6 guild boasting 50,000 members. But this? Were they mobilizing everyone? Ethan's lips twitched. Who designed that logo? A dog? Might as well stamp "attack us" on their foreheads. Yet the sheer scale of their gathering screamed one thing: something big was about to go down. And chaos? That was Ethan's playground. The army began its march, a living tide of steel and magic. Ethan kept his distance. No sane man would dive into that swarm. Instead, he focused on the command group at the center. 3 figures stood out. 1, the bone-pale necromantic summoner from earlier, Strategos, her skeletal staff pulsing with violet energy. 2, a hulking berserker shaman clad in obsidian totems, Melancholy Egg, his face etched with tribal scars. 3, and between them, a man whose very posture screamed authority, Gap in Defense, Apex Predators' guild master. Ethan checked the time, 5 a.m. 3 hours till shutdown. Too tight for a raid or exploration. What's their play? Ahead, the terrain grew unfamiliar, Carnage faction territory. It was uncharted in Ethan's memories. Right at that moment, Gap in Defense barked orders, his voice cutting through the sea of players gathered. The location's still secure? Melancholy Egg nodded. Tearless has 300 shadow blades guarding the entrance. Any trespassers get deleted before they blink. A smirk crept across his lips. Hell, he's bored out of his skull. He just asked when we're arriving. Gap in Defense grunted. Move faster. Clock's ticking. The procession halted at the base of a monolithic mountain, its peak lost in swirling mist. Before them yawned a cavern, its maw exhaling gusts that moaned like dying beasts. The trio stepped forward as the army waited behind. From the shadows, a 4th figure emerged, wielding lithe, twin daggers that gleamed even in the dark. Boss. About time. Tearless, Apex Predators' 4th pillar and master of shadow blades. Strategos' grip tightened on her staff. No issues? Tearless grinned. What issues? His eyes flicked. Heard you got played earlier, second sister. Melancholy Egg coughed violently, a warning ignored as Tearless twisted the knife. Some rookie baited you for hours? Damn. Even Marcus Gainer wasn't that sloppy. Strategos' knuckles whitened. The air crackled with impending violence. Ethan, watching from the shadows, exhaled slowly. This just got interesting. Chapter 288, Bickering Shadows. Strategos' expression darkened at the question. Gritting her teeth, she hissed, Bro, are you itching for a beating? Tearless chuckled. Oh yes, absolutely. Maybe after we log off, second sister can scratch that itch for me. The words sent Strategos' temper flaring, her face flushing with barely contained rage. He turned toward Gap in Defense, who merely offered an amused smirk. Don't look at me, Gap in Defense said, raising his hands. I'm not getting involved in your mess. Nearby, Melancholy Egg stifled a laugh. Neither of them dared comment further. The 4 of them had grown up together. Strategos and Tearless had become lovers during university. By the time they graduated, the so-called honeymoon phase had long since evaporated. Soon, they began secretly flirting with strangers online, each unaware of the other's escapades. Then came the fateful day they arranged to meet their respective flings, only to discover, in a twist of cosmic irony, that the man Strategos had been chatting with was Tearless, and the woman Tearless had been wooing turned out to be Strategos. From that moment on, they broke up and embraced their newfound, chaotic lifestyles. Now, every encounter between them was a battle, verbal, physical, occasionally even horizontal, only for them to immediately regret it afterward and resume their bickering. Their toxic dynamic left Gap in Defense and Melancholy Egg utterly exasperated. Right now, as the two began squaring off again, Gap in Defense quickly intervened. Enough. We're running out of time, he snapped. We need to take that thing down before Ethereal's servers shut down for maintenance. Second sister, third brother, you're both ranged DPS. Once its health drops to the threshold, use the consumables immediately. Doesn't matter who triggers it, just run like hell afterward. I'll hold the line with the others and keep it from chasing you. The second sister and third brother he referred to were Strategos and Melancholy Egg. Fourth brother, Gap in Defense continued, you keep leading the shadow blades and guard the entrance. No one gets in. Tearless slumped in disappointment. In his mind, he groaned, damn shadow blade class. Can't charge into team fights, can't engage in boss fights, just stuck babysitting the perimeter. If I could switch professions, I'd delete this character in a heartbeat. What they didn't know was that while Gap in Defense was busy strategizing, Ethan had already slipped past their forces. Alone, he crept into the gaping maw of the cavern. At the entrance, he activated stealth, weaving past hundreds of shadow blades lying in ambush. These players were all around level 37 or 38. Ethan, at level 46, moved like a ghost among them, utterly undetectable. Conversely, thanks to the 5-level advantage, their own stealth was useless against him. The moment they drifted too close, their translucent outlines solidified in his vision no matter how erratically they patrolled. To him, their haphazard movements were child's play. A few deft maneuvers later, and he had bypassed the entire Shadow Blade perimeter, slipping deeper into the cavern. His curiosity burned. What could possibly compel a level 6 guild to mobilize its entire force? As he ventured further, the stench of decay thickened in the air. The walls of the tunnel were unnaturally smooth, as if worn down by something massive over centuries. No branching paths, no deviations, just a single, winding passage leading inexorably forward. Then, rounding a final bend, Ethan froze. His breath caught. Before him stretched a colossal open chamber vast enough to hold a dozen football fields. Above, the inky void of the night sky loomed through a gaping hole in the ceiling. The cavern floor glittered, piles upon piles of luminous objects casting an eerie, ambient glow. And at the center of it all, a monstrous shape lay motionless. The creature before him was, unmistakably, a gargantuan lizard. Except perched awkwardly on its back was a pair of wings, pitifully small compared to its hulking frame. Ethan's jaw slackened as he stared. So, Apex Predators Guild was after a dragon. This dragon looked hideous, bearing thick-bodied, leathery wings, all brute force and jagged edges. Except this thing's wings were so stunted, so ludicrously undersized, that he couldn't fathom how it ever took flight. Lila's pet dragon, tiny as it was, had wings 3 times the size of its body. He activated advanced analysis. Ding! Obsidian Ridgeback. Rank, Rare Boss, injured/weakened. Level, 60. Health, 1,000,000/6 million. Defense, 3,000/30,000. Attack, 6,000/60,000. Skills, Tail Whip, Charge, Crush, Cleaving Tempest, Skull Bash, Dragon's Breath. Tameable, yes. Description, the Obsidian Ridgeback is a living battering ram, no creature can withstand its frontal assault. A new line in the analysis caught his eye, tameable. Ever since the pet system update, this tag indicated whether a creature could be captured. No wonder Apex Predators mobilized their entire guild. A wounded Ridgeback. Suddenly, Ethan felt a pang of envy for players aligned with the Carnage faction. Here, there were no borders, just an entire planet swallowed by darkness, teeming with danger and undiscovered secrets. Countless uncharted zones hid wonders no one could predict. Unlike the Survivor faction's neatly mapped territories where only a few hidden areas spawned creatures like this. The northern frontier had its own hidden bosses, of course, but nothing players could challenge yet. In Ethan's mind, even the weakest draconic entity started at level 130. He studied the Ridgeback closely. The stench of rot wafted from gashes along its ribs. In ethereal, draconic creatures were always high tier. This one might only be level 60 but uninjured? It would have been deadlier than a level 90 boss. Against a dragon at 30 levels and 1 rank to its threat. That was the mantra veteran raid teams lived by. Somehow, Apex Predators had stumbled upon a Ridgeback crippled this badly. Ridgebacks were weaker than true dragons, but still monstrous. Their strength lay in their frontal assaults. No tank could survive a direct skull bash from one at equal level. Then there was Tail Whip, a universal draconic skill which made positioning a nightmare. Melee fighters couldn't flank it standing behind triggered endless tail swipes. Dragons were worse, with Wing Buffet to knock back anyone on their flanks. Just imagine a frontline obliterated by skull bash. By the sides, Wing Buffet launches you into next week. And by the rear, Tail Whips came in loop. At least this Ridgeback's stunted wings meant no Wing Buffet. Chapter 289, The Obsidian Ridgeback's Wrath. The Obsidian Ridgeback, wounded and weakened, lay vulnerable, its massive frame shuddering with each labored breath. A head-on skull bash from such a beast would be manageable for a main tank, but Ethan already knew Apex Predators Guild was about to suffer catastrophic losses. The reason? This creature shouldn't have possessed Dragon's Breath, a high-tier ability capable of incinerating anything caught in its path. Worse, draconic beings love to swing their heads mid-exhalation, turning their lethal exhalation into a sweeping arc of annihilation. Anyone caught in that frontal cone without an escape plan might as well start booking their trip back to the graveyard. Still, the rewards made the risk worth it. If Ethan had stumbled upon a level 60 draconic entity like this back in the northern frontier region, injured or not, he would have mobilized Renegade Alliance's entire force, all 50,000 players, without hesitation. Because one rule held true in Ethereal. Draconic kills always drop dark gold gear, often far beyond the creature's own level. This Obsidian Ridgeback wouldn't just yield standard loot, it would cough up a level 90 dark gold item. Of course, level 90 referred to the attribute requirements for equipping it. A min-max player stacking passive stat boosts, or someone who devoured every permanent attribute item from hidden quests, could wear high-tier gear far earlier than intended. As Ethan assessed the Ridgeback's condition, a rustling echoed behind him. He pressed flat against the cavern wall, slipping deeper into the vast, open chamber. Right on cue, Apex Predators' forces poured into the passage. Thankfully, the cavern was enormous, otherwise, moving this many players through would have taken ages. It was already 6 p.m. Ethereal servers would shut down in 2 hours and Ethan had to log out early. The Noble 8 Lineage's decennial ranking tournament started at 8. The Ridgeback had less than 17% health left. Hurry the hell up. Apex predators clearly felt the pressure. The moment they flooded in, they fanned out, warriors forming ranks, casters planting their staves into the stone. The beast, roused by the intrusion, let out a guttural snarl, its massive head swaying as it glared at the ant-like figures invading its den. But it didn't attack. Not immediately. Injured, exhausted, it relied on intimidation, hoping to drive them back with sheer presence. Under normal circumstances, the first trespasser would have been reduced to paste. Attack. The threat failed. Gap in defense, Apex Predators Guild leader barked the order. Kill it. Melee fighters surged forward behind Berserker shield tanks while ranged units anchored themselves, spells crackling to life. The cavern thrummed with volatile magic. Yet the first strikes to land weren't spells, they were arrows. A hail of projectiles rained down, clattering harmlessly off the Ridgeback's armored hide. Ting ting ting. Not a single point of damage. Not even a scratch. A flurry of miss indicators floated up like mocking snowflakes. Ethan, still stealthed, muttered a curse and bolted sideways. You idiots, who told you to engage early? And aim for its wounds, not its damn scales. Gap in defense roared from the rear. Before his voice even faded. Ruer. The Ridgeback's head snapped up, jaws parting. A sickly, ochre glow built between its teeth, piercing the dim cavern with an eerie radiance. Ethan was already moving. He knew what came next. The obsidian Ridgeback's massive neck snapped downward like a collapsing tower, and the cavern trembled as a searing beam of molten earth erupted from its maw. Even in its prone position, the beast stood taller than 2-story buildings, its aim fixed mercilessly upon Apex Predators' hunter contingent. Run, hunters, move now. Melancholy Egg had already been screaming the moment the Ridgeback's head reared back. He was the unluckiest of them all, stationed directly in the line of fire. Boom. The beam carved through stone and flesh alike, turning the cavern floor into a smoldering trench. Ethan, who had been lurking nearby moments earlier, had already slipped to the side, his instincts screaming at him to flee before the first spark ignited. The hunters weren't so fortunate. Before their arrows could even knock, before their feet could find purchase, 4,000 hunters vanished in an instant. Gone. Erased in a single, catastrophic exhale. Only a handful, those who had sprinted like hell the second Melancholy Egg shouted, managed to escape the devastation. Ethan could only stare, his breath catching in his throat. This is the power of a draconic entity? And this was just a level 60 Ridgeback, wounded, weakened, barely clinging to life. Yet one breath had obliterated an entire battalion. The moment Gap in Defense had ordered his hunters to aim for its wounds, Ethan knew Apex Predators had no idea what they were dealing with. Draconic creatures, when not immediately threatened, defaulted to their most devastating ability, their breath. Telling hunters to focus fire on its injuries? Amateurish. Suicidal. But as the smoke cleared, Ethan noticed something else. The Ridgeback's attack had been cut short. It hadn't unleashed the full force of its breath. If it had, the casualties would have been far worse. And now, instead of pressing the assault, the beast remained motionless, still prone, still angry, but refusing to rise. That was the most baffling part. A Ridgeback's deadliest weapon wasn't its breath, it was its charge. Once it built momentum, nothing could stop it. The earth itself would tremble, and anything foolish enough to stand in its path would be reduced to pulp beneath its gargantuan, horned skull. Yet here it was, ignoring its greatest strength. Is it so badly injured it can't even stand? If so, Apex Predators might actually pull this off. A slow grin spread across Ethan's face. Then again, who's to say they'll be the ones walking away with the spoils? The Ridgeback's strange behavior renewed his confidence. If he played this right, he could snatch his prize and vanish before the clock ran out. Otherwise, he'd have no choice but to log off early for the decennial tournament. Thud. 3,000 Berserker shield warriors crashed into the Ridgeback's flanks, their massive tower shields slamming against its hide with enough force to make the beast sway. Ruer. It bellowed in fury, but its grounded position left it vulnerable. Instead of rising, it thrashed, rolling its bulk, swiping with its claws, lashing out with its spiked tail. The first wave of warriors who reached its hindquarters learned the hard way. Wham! The tail strike sent them flying like ragdolls. Those with weaker gear died instantly, their bodies crumpling against the cavern walls. The better-equipped survivors barely clung to life, their health bars flickering red. Unfazed, they healed up and charged again. Wham! Another tail swipe. Another wave of bodies hurled through the air. Gap in Defense, still positioned at the Ridgeback's front, had no idea what was happening behind it. By the third failed assault, someone finally screamed into guild chat. Boss, you can't tank its back. The tail knocks you back every time. Chapter 290, Flaw in the Formation. The moment Gap in Defense received the urgent report, his reaction was instantaneous, though a fleeting pause betrayed a flicker of shock before he barked out commands with the authority of someone used to having them followed without question. Everyone, spread out and flank it from both sides, no one moves behind it. Shield tanks, stay disciplined. Maintain strike timing exactly as drilled. Keep it pinned, no more rolling. The Obsidian Ridgeback, a monstrous force of nature, had already torn through a squad of melee fighters during its initial onslaught, leaving behind a gruesome trail of twisted bodies that resembled discarded marionettes. Though those fighters hadn't made much of a dent in the beast's health, their role wasn't to harm, it was to hold. Their sacrifice bought time for the shield tanks to surround the creature. But with their numbers dwindling rapidly, the prospect of locking down a creature that stood 17 meters tall and stretched 40 meters in length became far more uncertain. Members of Apex Predators Guild responded with the kind of lethal coordination that only came from endless hours of training and real battle experience. Ethan, watching with sharp, calculating eyes, couldn't help but be impressed by how efficiently they moved, their synchronization almost inhuman. At the front lines, directly confronting the Ridgeback, stood Gap in defense, unmoving and resolute. His massive tower shield trembled with every crushing impact from the beast's jagged fangs, each collision resounding like a war drum echoing through the cavernous battlefield. Flanking him on both sides, 3 other shield tanks locked shields in stance, bracing themselves against the dragon's sweeping claw strikes with the kind of timing that seemed rehearsed to perfection. Then it began, thud, thud, a rhythmic cadence of shield bashes so perfectly in sync that it sounded less like separate individuals and more like one giant being hammering in defiance. Even Ethan, hardened by battles of his own, felt a twinge of awe pulling at the corners of his mouth. So this is what crushed the Survivor faction during the faction wars. The Carnage faction had forged their strength in clashes just like this, battles where survival wasn't about strength alone, but about discipline and absolute cohesion. The survivors, by contrast, had spent too long repelling frequent raids and guild fights, never facing threats that demanded this level of unity. The wall of shields that now pressed the Ridgeback down was more than just a tactic, it was a philosophy, one practiced by thousands. And it worked. Each time the beast showed signs of curling its body for another devastating roll, the formation struck in perfect unison, slamming it back down with such force that its motion collapsed in on itself. Recognizing the importance of what he was witnessing, Ethan activated his recording module, silently tagging the footage for Skyblade. He might still be a noob now, but studying Gap in defense, a player whose reputation had bordered on myth in Ethan's past life, could cut years off his development curve. It was clear that Apex Predators had come fully prepared. They weren't improvising, they had already scouted the Obsidian Ridgeback extensively. Their ranged players had repositioned as a single body, clustering to the beast's left flank and concentrating fire on a large, ragged wound that gaped along its unarmored underside. Ethan's mind ticked like a metronome. Whatever had inflicted that damage wasn't in the room now, but its mark had created an opening that could be exploited. Under different conditions, hunters equipped with aimed shot would be topping the damage meters without contest. The exposed flesh lacked the Ridgeback's otherwise impenetrable scales, rendering it a glaring weak point. Yet even in the absence of high-end hunters, the guild's 18,000 ranged members were systematically reducing its health bar. Spellcasters rotated through their incantations with near-mechanical precision, short bursts of magic taking no longer than a second and a half, each contributing to a coordinated barrage that, by Ethan's estimate, would take 50 rounds of focused fire to drop the creature. That translated to just over an hour of continuous assault. Maybe 80 minutes if complications arose. Ethan glanced at the clock. There was still time, assuming nothing went wrong. But wrong wasn't just a possibility in Ethereal. It was a guarantee. For now, the Ridgeback remained subdued beneath the iron discipline of the shield tanks. But if it lashed out again, if the formation cracked even slightly, the front lines would collapse and the vulnerable rear ranks would be reduced to slaughtered prey. Time, like blood, would pour from the guild's grasp. Ethan crouched low, wedged in the buffer zone between melee and ranged fighters, unmoving. Then, slowly, he shifted back against the jagged edge of a broken pillar. The stone was cold and it bit into his spine, but he remained still, his gaze darting across the field. The beast's screams filled the cavern with a dreadful melody, shrill, furious, and weakening. Yet despite the guild's flawless execution, something kept Ethan on edge. His hands wouldn't stay still. He felt it again. A tingling at the base of his skull. That primal sense that someone or something was watching. Twice now he had spun around, searching the periphery of the fight for signs of another presence. Each time, he came up empty. No movement where there shouldn't have been. Just chaos and the soldiers navigating it. Still, he moved. Carefully. Quietly. He slipped into another shadowed crevice near the cavern wall just as flickers of motion began to manifest at the entrance. The hunters had returned. First a trickle, then a stream, then a flood, dozens, then hundreds of them, fresh from the graveyard, faces set like stone. The Ridgeback's health bar flashed ominously as it edged closer to oblivion. 545,215/6,000,000, 9%. The returning hunters wasted no time. The first volley was like a thunderclap tearing across the cave. 4,000 bows loosed in one deafening wave. Twang! A storm of black-feathered arrows soared through the air in a deadly arc, every one aimed with grim accuracy at the wounded flank. Rahar! The Ridgeback's howl made the cavern quake as the arrows punched into its flesh, turning the exposed wound into a forest of embedded shafts. Red numbers exploded above its body in a blizzard of damage notifications. -15. -16. -18. -85. -85. The smaller numbers came from standard aimed shots, exploiting the weakened flesh. But those devastating double-eights? Specialty arrows. Ethan's breath caught. The hunters weren't just back, they were armed for war. Apex Predators had supplied their entire division with true damage ammunition. Although not legendary tier, they were powerful enough to bypass the beast's defenses completely. That single synchronized volley had probably burned through a mountain of gold. And it paid off. 400,000 HP erased. The Ridgeback's life total collapsed into a sliver. 54,785/6 million, 1%. Ethan exhaled sharply, whistling low under his breath. If these hunters hadn't died earlier, they could have finished the boss off in just a few more volleys. But there was a catch. True damage arrows only worked when the target's armor could be bypassed. Earlier in the fight, when the Ridgeback's obsidian scale hide was still intact, even enchanted projectiles would have bounced off. In Ethereal, if a physical attack couldn't break through armor, it didn't deal chip damage, it dealt nothing. Just a miss. Spells, at least, always landed for a point or two. And these arrows? They were banned from most dungeons. Strictly for open-world use. Otherwise, the richest players in the game would be soloing bosses with their wallets instead of skill. The effectiveness of the volley jolted Ethan to life. He hadn't positioned himself properly. No access to the corpse once it dropped. 1% remaining. Still time to reposition. He tensed, ready to move. Hold. Fucking hold fire. Gapindefen's voice tore across the battlefield, hoarse and urgent, his face glistening with sweat. Even he hadn't expected the volley to hit that hard. The Ridgeback wavered, bleeding from every pore, a single strike away from collapse. Ethan stopped mid-motion, eyes narrowing. What the hell are they doing? And then it came again. That feeling. The hairs on his neck rose like wires pulled taut. He dove sideways, flattening himself against the ground behind a half-shattered column. His chest rose and fell like a drumbeat. This time it wasn't a false alarm, something was watching. And now they were close. Chapter 291, The Ambush at Hollow Shade Peak. Ethan's senses were stretched to their limits, every nerve attuned to the slightest disturbance in the air around him. His instincts screamed of unseen threats, yet the forest remained eerily still, no flicker of movement, no telltale shimmer of stealth. The tension hung thick for several heartbeats before dissipating, leaving no trace of the rogue or shadow blade he had feared might be lurking. Even the Apex Predators Guild members had ceased their assault, their weapons lowered as if waiting for an unseen signal. The Obsidian Ridgeback's health bar flickered weakly, its massive form now reduced to a sliver, barely 30,000 hit points remained. Strategos, Melancholy Egg now? Gapindefen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Ethan reacted instantly, muscles coiling as he dropped into a defensive stance. For a split second, he thought they had spotted him, that they were halting their assault on the beast to eliminate him first before he could interfere. But then, Strategos and Melancholy Egg? That necromantic summoner and the berserker shaman longer than Luffy mentioned? Two streaks of golden light erupted from the ranged positions, arcing through the air, not toward him, but toward the wounded Ridgeback. Ethan's breath caught. Oh, you bastards! He recognized those items instantly. Soulbinding collars. Their purpose was singular, capturing wild creatures as pets. When a tameable beast's health dropped below 50%, tossing one of these had a chance to ensnare it. The lower the health, the higher the odds. No wonder they brought an entire raid party. They hadn't come to kill it, they'd come to break it. 600,000 hit points whittled down to a pathetic 30,000. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was a guarantee. But success wasn't instant. Once collared, the creature would frenzy, locking onto its would-be captor with murderous intent. Survive its onslaught long enough and the contract would solidify, binding the beast as a companion. Fail, and the collar shattered along with any hope of taming it. The duration of the struggle depended on the collar's tier and the creature's strength. For a draconic monstrosity like this? It should take about half an hour at least. The first golden collar from Strategos descended. Clang. It bounced off uselessly. The necromancer's face darkened as the system notification flashed, capture failed. Ethan almost smirked. Those collars weren't cheap. Guild resources wasted in an instant. He could piece together their plan easily enough. Their scouts must have discovered this cave, stumbled upon the injured Ridgeback, and rallied for the kill only for the ethereal system's maintenance to delay them. Then, with the new pet system going live today, they gambled. Why settle for random drops when they could claim a living weapon? What they didn't know was that draconic creatures always dropped at least one dark gold item, sometimes more. But their logic wasn't entirely flawed. A dragon-class pet would be devastating. The weight of their gamble pressed down on Melancholy Egg's shoulders as he recalled the frantic rush back to Ember City, the way his fingers had trembled while purchasing those damned collars. 7,000 gold, enough to bankrupt lesser guilds, enough to make even Apex Predators' treasury gasp under the strain. Each collar had cost them 3,500 gold. 2 collars. 7,000 gold. The memory of their guild's ascension to Tier 6 still haunted them. They'd bled themselves dry for it, emptied coffers, liquidated assets, sacrificed personal dreams. Gapindefense had sold his newly renovated townhouse, the one he'd painstakingly prepared for a future that now seemed laughably distant. Not like I have a wife yet, there's no point keeping a house fresh. Besides, the market's up now, so selling's no loss. The words had been delivered with that infuriating, unshakable confidence of his, but they all knew the truth. That house had represented years of grinding outside the game, a life beyond the screen. And he'd tossed it into the guild's coffers without hesitation. A gamble, a damned reckless gamble. But it had paid off until now. Strategos' collar had failed, which meant everything rode on melancholy eggs. The necromancer's fingers twitched as the second golden ring spiraled through the air, its hum deeper, more resonant than the first. The sound set his teeth on edge. Please. Just this once. Snap. The collar locked around the obsidian ridgeback's thick, scaled neck. For a heartbeat, silence prevailed. Then, their brother. Gapindefense's voice cracked like a whip. It worked, but Melancholy Egg's throat went dry as the system prompt seared across his vision. But what? I have to survive 40 minutes. The words tasted like ash. 40 minutes. With 1 minute to spare before the ethereal servers forced them offline. Ethan's grip on his dagger turned white-knuckled. They actually did it. Those bastards actually captured it. Beneath him, the earth trembled as the ridgeback's massive form shuddered, its wounds knitting together beneath a creeping lattice of crimson energy. The beast's ragged breaths became guttural growls, its muscles coiling like loaded springs. Ethan didn't wait. He slid back, silent as a shadow, every instinct screaming at him to run. A frenzied draconic was bad enough. A frenzied draconic with a personal vendetta? Suicide. But just as he prepared to retreat, that familiar, crawling sensation returned, the unmistakable weight of being watched. Sharper this time, closer. His head snapped up. There. At the cavern's jagged ceiling, perched along the uneven lip of stone, something hulking crouched in the shadows. Distance blurred its form, but its eyes. Oh hell. Twin embers of blood-red light burned through the darkness, fixed not on him, but on the ridgeback below. A new kind of dread coiled in Ethan's gut. No. No way. The ridgeback's roar split the air, a sound that shook stalactites loose from the ceiling. Its front legs tensed, claws gouging furrows into the stone as it heaved itself upright. Gapindefense and his shield tanks braced, they raised their weapons, ready to weather the storm. Melancholy Egg, ever the pragmatist, had already bolted for the farthest wall, calculating survival over valor. Just keep running. Just stay alive. But then, the ridgeback moved and every single person in that cavern froze. Chapter 292, Obsidian Ridgeback's Last Stand. The obsidian ridgeback writhed, its massive forelegs trembling as it hauled itself upright, though its hindquarters remained pinned to the ground. Muscles rippled beneath its obsidian-scaled hide, and its horned head swayed in erratic arcs, eyes glinting with a feral, bloodthirsty light. Just as the group braced for it to lunge at Melancholy Egg, the beast suddenly wrenched its neck sideways and slammed its skull into the cavern floor with earth-shattering force. Boom! The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the hollow, dislodging ancient stalactites in a lethal rain. Ethan was hurled off his feet, landing hard on his back, the wind knocked from his lungs. For a moment he just lay there, blinking through the dust, stunned into paralysis. What the hell? This wasn't normal behavior, not for a ridgeback, not for any creature. Ensnared by the soul-binding collar, it should have been single-mindedly chasing its tormentor with mindless precision. Instead, it was headbutting the ground like a deranged battering ram. Now, as the haze began to lift and the tremors eased, the beast's frenzied gaze flickered, something almost like clarity flashing through the madness. Then, a shriek split the air like a dagger through silence. Ethan's head snapped upward. The creature he'd sensed earlier, the one lurking just beyond sight in the shadow-choked vault of the cavern, had finally revealed itself. A warhawk, wings spanning 50 meters edge to edge, perched atop a jagged outcrop. Its talons gouged deep grooves into the stone, and it screeched again, the piercing sound reverberating through the chamber like a challenge flung across a battlefield. Below, the ridgeback reacted instantly. With a roar that shook loose dust from the ceiling, it surged to its full, towering height, defiance burning in its narrowed eyes. So that's where its injuries came from. The warhawk dwarfed the ridgeback, sleek where the other was brutal, its feathers edged with an unnatural metallic sheen. If it descended now, the already wounded beast wouldn't last 10 seconds. And if the ridgeback died, today's efforts, the sacrifices, the resources, everything would be for nothing. Gapindefense clenched his fists, teeth grinding as he stared at the avian predator with raw, rising frustration. He knew the math, if that thing joined the fray, casualties wouldn't just spike, they'd skyrocket. The ridgeback had been mauled by it. What chance did a group of players have? His jaw worked silently before he finally spat the order. Fall back. Now. All units, evacuate. The words felt leaden in his mouth, hollow as they left him, like he'd just signed the death warrant for their mission. Murmurs of protest rose, captain, guild leader, but died just as quickly. They knew. He was right. As the guild scrambled to disengage, Ethan stayed low, his panther form granting him an unusually low and clear sight line. And there it was, beneath the ridgeback's belly, partially hidden in a shallow depression of earth and stone, 3 oblong shapes, faintly luminous in the gloom. Eggs? His pulse spiked. That's why it wouldn't move. That's why it had chosen to take the punishment, to bleed and remain grounded. This wasn't just a beast, it was a mother. But the realization came a heartbeat too late. Gapindefense, already several strides into the retreat, glanced back one last time and froze. His eyes locked onto the clutch. Hold! He bellowed, voice cracking. Focus fire. Kill the ridgeback before it. Too late. With a final, desperate roar, the beast succumbed fully to the collar's corruption. Its pupils dilated into twin voids as its health bar surged from 1% to 10%, 60,000 HP in a heartbeat. Gapindefense nearly collapsed. The ridgeback pivoted. Its charge was already primed. Its target? Melancholy Egg, who just rounded the cavern's entrance. The retreating forces of Apex Predators Guild had barely processed their leader's aborted command when the Obsidian Ridgeback struck. Its charge was a cataclysm of muscle, fury, and mass, a living avalanche barreling through the bottlenecked ranks near the cavern's entrance. Chaos erupted in visceral detail. Bodies were flung like ragdolls, limbs flailing, bones audibly snapping beneath the thunderous assault. Shield tanks, meant to be the immovable foundation of any defense, were caught mid-turn, their armor buckling like tin under the force of the Ridgeback's momentum. One warrior flew backward so violently his breastplate caved in, the indentation unmistakably shaped like the beast's horn. Blood misted the air in crimson arcs, spattering across the stalactites above in macabre, blooming streaks. Gap in Defense watched in horror, his stomach twisted into a cold knot as the charge carved a trench of death through his lines. 2,000 players erased in the span of a breath. Their avatars dissolved into the sickly white haze of forced respawn. All because he'd hesitated. Because he'd dared to hope for those damned eggs. At the tunnel's bend, Melancholy Egg skidded to a stop, his back pressed against the damp, jagged stone. The Ridgeback's skull slammed into the rock beside him, halting its rampage mere inches from his face. The impact cratered the wall, hairline fractures spiderwebbing outward as dust and pebbles rained down like ash. Outside the entrance, the battlefield was eerily empty, just Melancholy Egg and a straight, 300-meter stretch between him and the exit. If the Ridgeback charged again, for seconds, he'd be lucky to last one. Back inside, the remnants of the guild were trapped, the Ridgeback's massive bulk sealing the passage like a living barricade. The only way out was through it, and right now its attention was locked, laser-focused, on the figure who'd enslaved it. Ethan crouched low, his panther form's obsidian fur merging with the shadows. His eyes darted between the Ridgeback, the distant clutch of eggs, and the true wild card looming above, the Warhawk. Its dive began. The avian predator's descent was a masterpiece of lethal precision, wings tucked tight, talons extended like curved scimitars, its shriek peeling the air open like a blade drawn across steel. But its trajectory wasn't aimed at the Ridgeback. The eggs. Ethan's thoughts raced, the truth snapping into place piece by piece. The Ridgeback's injuries. Its refusal to run, even under the collar's agony. The way it had shielded that patch of ground with its massive body, refusing to budge even as its own blood soaked the stone. This wasn't just a territorial fight. The Warhawk was an opportunist, a scavenger swooping in to exploit the Ridgeback's postpartum weakness. And now, with the beast distracted by its own corrupted instincts, the eggs were completely defenseless. Ethan was 10 meters from the clutch. The Warhawk 200 meters up and closing like a missile. Gap in defense? 40 meters back, frozen mid-step, his face contorted in dawning comprehension and helpless rage. His fingers twitched toward his sword hilt, then fell slack. He knew. Even if he sprinted, even if he activated every movement buff he had, he'd never beat the Warhawk to its prize. Chapter 293, Predator's Gambit. As the creature descended, Gap in Defense quickly threw out his advanced analysis. Ethan did the same. Black-feathered cuckoo beast. Rank, rare boss. Level, 98. Health, 9,800,000 / 9,800,000. Defense, 49,000. Attack, 98,000. Skills, Pounce, Wing Strike, Peck, Hawk's Eye. Tameable, yes. Description, black-feathered cuckoo beasts are cunning but not particularly powerful. They thrive by devouring the young of other creatures, absorbing their strength to grow. The advanced analysis confirmed Ethan's suspicions. Cuckoos, even in the real world, they were notorious egg thieves. What's more, he noticed that one of its claws and half its body bore scorch marks. Probably got roasted by a Ridgeback's breath during their fight. The injuries weren't life-threatening, though. After recovering, it had returned ready to strike again. And now, it had stumbled upon Apex Predators Guild battling the same obsidian Ridgeback. The beast had decided to play the vulture, waiting to scavenge the spoils. Talk about bad luck. Not only were they on Ethan's hit list, but a level 98 rare boss had them in its crosshairs too. Even if he hadn't shown up today, they'd have had no chance of taming that Ridgeback. Ethan did the math. Snagging those dragon eggs wouldn't be easy, even for him. He was the closest, but the black-feathered cuckoo beast was plummeting like a loosed arrow just as fast. By the time his fingers brushed the first egg, the beast would be upon him. And Ethan had zero confidence he could survive a single hit. Sure, its skills were garbage, no real combat techniques, but with 98,000 attack power, even a basic strike would obliterate him. Back off or go all in. The hesitation lasted less than a tenth of a second. Ethan wasn't some half-baked Gap in Defense, scrambling for last-minute solutions. He'd prepped for this. Worst-case scenario? He'd lose some EXP and a piece of gear. As long as his exclusive weapon stayed intact, the rest was expendable. And even that wasn't a concern, the damn thing was soulbound, tagged with indestructible in its stats. So he went for it. The payoff? 3 dragon eggs. Even one would make death worthwhile. His body hurtled downward as the calculations flashed through his mind. 5 meters. 4. 3. 2. 1. Just as his fingertips grazed the egg's shell, the cuckoo beast snapped its wings open. A gale-force wind erupted, hurling Ethan 10 meters backward like a leaf in a storm. Son of a. The curse burned in his throat. The beast hadn't targeted him specifically. The wing flare was just a braking maneuver. Without it, the creature's skull would have splattered on impact. Its descent slowed, but its talons were already outstretched, zeroing in on one of the eggs. That's when Ethan noticed its other claw was mangled, hanging limp. Not so tough after all. No wonder it was so hellbent on revenge. It had clearly failed the first. Now it intended to try again. Except, this wasn't theft anymore. The angle, the force, this was annihilation. The beast wasn't here to steal, it was here to destroy. Ethan's vision tinged red. Oh, fuck you. His boots' enchantment flared. Swift stride. Ethan lunged forward with a burst of unnatural speed, his body cutting through the air like a bullet aimed straight for the dragon egg clutched in the black-feathered cuckoo beast's talons. Transform, bear form. The moment the shift took hold, his stealth shattered, not that it had mattered to the damned bird in the first place. The creature had seen through his concealment from the start, dismissing him as nothing more than an insignificant pest. A single flap of its wings had sent him flying earlier, like a child swatting away a bothersome fly. From his vantage point in the distance, Gapindefen's eyes widened in disbelief. Who the hell was this guy? He hadn't accounted for a wild card in this equation. And Ethan wasn't just any druid, his bear form wasn't the standard hulking mass of fur and muscle. There was something off about it, something that made Gapindefense hesitate before connecting the dots. But Ethan didn't have time to care about spectators, his mind was locked onto one thing, the eggs. The sheer value of a single dragon egg was staggering. And this feathered bastard wasn't just trying to steal them, it was trying to smash them to pieces. Sure, even if it succeeded in stealing them, the outcome would have been the same, the eggs devoured or destroyed. But watching it happen right in front of him? Unacceptable. This wasn't just about survival, this was profit. Screw it. Go all in. Ethan lived by one rule when it came to skills, holding back was not an option. Use it now, let it cool down later. The instant bear form fully manifested, he triggered another ability, one etched into the very core of his weapon. Transformation, ancient demigod. A 30-day cooldown that alone spoke volumes. He'd never used it himself, but he'd seen Lila unleash a forbidden tier skill from his legendary weapon. The aftermath had been apocalyptic. Ethan had chosen to activate it in bear form for one reason, time. All he needed was a single second to stash those eggs into his inventory. But what happened next defied all expectations. A thunderous roar split the air as a column of golden light erupted from the heavens, slamming into Ethan's body with the force of a divine hammer. The bear form, previously standing upright, was forced back onto all fours, his posture shifting into the primal stance of a true beast. And then, he grew. His body swelled, muscles expanding, bones reforging themselves under the weight of raw, untamed power. His health, defense, attack, every stat skyrocketed. In the span of a single breath, the bear form that had once been imposing became colossal. Where before he'd been a 3-meter-long, 2-meter-tall beast, now he towered at 30 meters in length, 20 in height. The previous version might as well have been a teddy bear in comparison. His health surged to 320,000. Defense now sat between 51,280 and 56,138. A 9.2-fold increase. Attack power had quadrupled, now ranging from 12,990 to 18,657. The scaling was tied to his level exactly as he'd theorized. And the duration? 10 minutes. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something dangerously close to invincibility. Scree! The black-feathered cuckoo beast let out a shrill, panicked cry as Ethan's sudden expansion sent it catapulting backward, its wings flailing wildly to regain balance. Ethan didn't waste a second. With the beast momentarily disoriented, he scooped all 3 dragon eggs beneath his massive belly, tucking them securely against his fur. Gotcha! But the victory was short-lived. A deafening roar echoed from the cave entrance, the obsidian ridgeback had returned. The soul-binding collar around its neck was gone. That could only mean one thing, Melancholy Egg, the berserker shaman, was dead. The ridgeback stormed into the chamber, its massive frame trembling with fury, only to freeze at the sight before it. Its nest, its eggs. And a 30-meter-tall bear now occupying the space where it should have been. For a long, tense moment, the ridgeback just stared. Chapter 294, The Egg Thief. The obsidian ridgeback reared its head, confusion flickering across its reptilian eyes. This draconic creature couldn't comprehend why a giant bear was sprawled in its nest. Was it incubating its eggs? It glanced back at the cave entrance, its mind struggling to process how the massive intruder had slipped inside unnoticed. Ethan, still in his towering ursine form, shifted awkwardly to the side, an unspoken, "My bad, it's all yours." But the moment he moved, the hollow where the dragon egg had lain was exposed to the 4 factions watching. The egg was gone. Gapindefense had been puzzling over Ethan's identity since his sudden appearance. At first, he assumed Ethan was just another player. Then, as the man morphed into an unrecognizable, hulking monstrosity, he dismissed the idea no player could transform into something so colossal. When Ethan crouched over the nest, Gapindefense briefly entertained the notion that he was the Ridgeback's ally. Now, with the egg vanished and Ethan the obvious culprit, realization struck. Another damn thief. He nearly wept. The egg was the sought-after? 2 enormous beasts, both here to steal it? An apex predators guild had already paid too steep a price. A thunderous roar split the air, then a piercing shriek. The two behemoths, finally noticing the empty nest, unleashed their fury in unison. Ethan barely had time to curse before they struck. The Ridgeback's maw glowed ominously as it gathered its dragon's breath. The feathered monstrosity, the black-feathered cuckoo beast, flapped its wings violently, sending a barrage of razor-sharp plumage hurtling toward him. Panic surged through Ethan. Even in his demigod bear state, his level was too low. 320,000 HP wouldn't last long under this assault. Iron hide. The first feather struck his back like a molten dagger. The pain was excruciating. And the attack wasn't solitary, dozens more followed in a relentless storm. In seconds, a third of his health vanished. Minus 102,487. Before he could recover, the Ridgeback's breath attack erupted, a searing beam of energy that slammed into his flank. Minus 56,891. And it wasn't a one-time hit. System alert. Ancient Bear Spirit has sustained critical damage. Transformation will be forcibly terminated. Ethan nearly choked on his own rage. What kind of bullshit is this? The skill lasts 10 minutes. Since when does the spirit nope out early because it got hurt? If the bear spirit was abandoning him, he wasn't sticking around either. Snatching a random teleport scroll from his inventory, he crushed it in his paw. Just as his form began to shrink, the cuckoo beast's second wave of feathers sliced through the air. The Ridgeback's breath attack surged anew. Boom. The combined assault obliterated the spot where Ethan had stood. Gap in defense, still hidden at a distance, watched as the Ridgeback lumbered back into its cave, the path now clear. He quickly signaled the guild, fall back. Now. He didn't dare shout aloud, not when these three monsters could turn on him next. As the dust settled, the two beasts glared at each other, their shared enemy vanquished. But their momentary truce shattered instantly. Rage, hatred, and primal fury ignited between them. Gap in defense stood frozen, his body wedged between two titanic forces of nature, the obsidian Ridgeback and the black-feathered cuckoo beast. The air itself trembled with their fury, the ground beneath his feet cracking under the strain of their colossal movements. Yet his mind was elsewhere, consumed by a revelation that had struck him like a lightning bolt. Just moments ago, as he had ordered his guild to retreat, he had seen it, a flicker of white light amidst the chaos of explosions and searing energy. A random teleport scroll's signature glow. The realization hit him like a hammer to the chest. That bear was a player. Not an NPC or a summoned entity, a player. His thoughts raced, piecing together the absurdity of it all. The transformation, the sheer audacity of stealing the egg right under the noses of two elite-tier monsters, it defied logic. But before he could process it further, reality reasserted itself in the most violent way possible. The shockwave from the Ridgeback's tail whip collided with the cuckoo beast's wing buffet and gap in defense, unfortunate soul that he was found himself directly in the path of the converging forces. His body disintegrated before he could even scream. Meanwhile, the actual egg thief, Ethan, was currently sprawled in a thicket of brambles, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The adrenaline of the escape still coursed through his veins, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled up his inventory. There they were. 4 dragon eggs nestled side by side in his storage, their shells shimmering faintly with latent energy. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. Worth it. With a satisfied exhale, he selected the log-out option. Gap in defense had respawned outside the cave, his guild members regrouping around him. The distant roars and crashes from within had finally ceased, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. They're done, he muttered. Seizing the opportunity, he led one last desperate charge into the cavern only to find the passage completely collapsed. System alert, server shut down in 15 seconds. 14. 13. Gap in defense jaw clenched. The noise would have drawn every opportunistic guild within 5 zones. By dawn, this place would be swarming with rivals. Excavating the rubble would require hours of work and a small war to keep the spoils. Back in the real world, within the Silverwood family estate, Ethan yanked off his VR headset, blinking as the dim lighting of his room adjusted around him. The transition from the adrenaline-fueled chaos of ethereal to the quiet stillness of his quarters was jarring. His muscles ached, phantom pains from the bare form's exertion, but the thrill of success outweighed any discomfort. He stretched, rolling his shoulders, then made his way to the bathroom. The cold water he splashed on his face did little to dull the lingering excitement. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, the rich, earthy aroma of medicinal herbs and simmering rice greeted him. Maria had risen early to prepare a pot of porridge, the steam curling lazily from its surface. Ethan smirked as he noted the discarded Silverwood family meal in the trash. Not even good enough for Goldie, Matriarch Whitmore had scoffed earlier, referring to the family's golden retriever. And who knows what they've laced it with. So instead, Maria had prepared a lavish congee infused with rare mountain herbs and delicacies, a dish that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. As Ethan sat down to eat, his curiosity finally got the better of him. So, he said between spoonfuls, I've noticed everyone in the Whitmore family has spatial storage. How does one acquire something like that? The reaction was immediate, the entire table burst into laughter. Chapter 295, The Dragon's Secret. Ethan found himself the target of the Whitmore family's laughter, utterly baffled. Was it really that funny? Are they mocking me for not being able to afford it, or what? Markham noticed Ethan's bewildered expression and realized he'd misunderstood. Clapping him on the shoulder with a knowing smirk, he said, Relax, Ethan. Don't overthink it. This ability of ours isn't some big secret. You know we all have dragon souls, right? Well, do you know where we store them? At that, Ethan frowned, then his eyes widened in realization. Wait, that pocket dimension you guys have, it's meant for holding your dragon souls? And you just toss random junk in there too? Markham's nose wrinkled in mild offense. Damn, Ethan really has a way with words, random junk? Still, he nodded. Yeah. We call it the Dragon Vault. Every Whitmore who awakens their dragon soul inherits this space. Ethan's hopes of buying one outright were instantly crushed. He couldn't help but envy the Whitmores for this ability. Forget combat advantages, the sheer convenience was unreal. No backpacks needed. Toss anything inside and it stayed perfectly preserved. Frozen goods? Still icy. Fresh meat and vegetables? Crisp as the moment they went in. A fridge couldn't even compare. Heh. The Whitmore matriarch chuckled at his crestfallen expression. Don't lose heart, boy. This power isn't exclusive to our bloodline. Once your soul sense grows strong enough to commune with the Gate of Ascension and unlock it, you'll be able to store things within your mindscape too. Boom. Ethan's mind reeled. What the hell? You're telling me all I had to do was open the damn Gate of Ascension and I could have been using it as a storage locker this whole time. Morzan. He roared internally. Is this true? Of course, silence prevailed. Melinda, seated across from Ethan with Markham between them, took a delicate sip of her porridge. Glancing up, she caught the storm of emotions flickering across his face. Assuming he was disheartened by the steep requirement, she offered a consoling smile. Don't worry, Ethan. Even if you never reach the pinnacle of strength, become a Whitmore man and we have special methods to help you improve. Her eyelid dipped in a sly wink. Special methods? Whitmore man? Ethan's gaze naturally drifted downward, first to the generous swell of her chest, then further, tracing the length of her legs. Ahem. Markham's exaggerated cough snapped him back to reality. Ethan stiffened, heat creeping up his neck. Right? Probably shouldn't let his intrusive thoughts run wild at this moment. He jerked his attention back to Melinda, only to meet a glare that was equal parts scolding, flustered, and alarmingly interested. Ethan ducked his head, shoveling porridge into his mouth to avoid speaking. Holy hell, what the fuck is wrong with me? Empty your mind, temptation is the devil's playground. Do not get involved with a Whitmore woman. The matriarch sighed, watching Melinda's reaction. The struggles of Whitmore women were known only to Whitmore women. Just then, Maria entered with a tray of side dishes, placing them on the table. The matriarch reached out, pulling her down with unexpected tenderness. Maria blinked, bewildered by the sudden affection. Markham witnessed the exchange and let out a quiet sigh, his shoulders slumping ever so slightly. The matriarch and Melinda noticed his reaction immediately. For just a fraction of a second, something like pity flickered in their eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by steely resolve. Then, without warning, Melinda's palm shot out. Whap! The slap connected with the back of Markham's skull with enough force to slam his face straight into his bowl of porridge, sending a splash of milky broth across the table. The impact was so sudden, so violent, that even Ethan winced in sympathy. Damn. Talk about double standards. What are you sighing about, you little brat? Melinda snapped, her voice dripping with mock exasperation. Eat your damn food, then go save us some seats. Markham peeled his face from the bowl, wiping porridge from his eyebrows with a miserable expression. Auntie, you guys have seats already, he grumbled. Up on the platform and everything. Did I ask for your opinion? This time, it was the matriarch who cut in, her tone sharp enough to slice stone. But then, just as quickly, she relented slightly. Thinking of those bastards makes my blood boil, she muttered. After breakfast, Ethan and the Chase siblings followed Markham to the combat arena, arriving well ahead of the main crowd. Or so they thought. The moment they stepped into the open-air coliseum, their hopes deflated like a punctured tire. The stands were already packed to the brim, a sea of bodies shifting restlessly in anticipation of the day's events. Markham's face fell. Shit, he groaned, wringing his hands. No good spots left, which means I'm definitely getting my ass kicked later. Just then. Markham. Ethan. Over here. The group turned toward the voice. There, wedged between two burly spectators, Bobby and Rook waved frantically. They'd somehow secured a small, miraculously empty section of the bleachers marked by a row of strategically placed chess pieces on the stone seats. Markham's eyes lit up like a kid spotting a candy store. He bulldozed through the crowd, the others trailing behind. You saved these for us? He demanded, eyeing the 7 vacant spots. Bobby puffed out his chest. Hell yeah, we did. You think we'd forget about you guys? Markham clapped him on the shoulder. Good man. Without another word, he ushered the Chase siblings into the seats, treating the arrangement like some divine right. But the moment Bobby and Rook moved to sit down themselves, thwack, thwack. Markham's foot lashed out twice in rapid succession, planting squarely in each of their backsides and sending them stumbling forward. The hell, Markham? Bobby yelped, rubbing his tailbone where the kick had landed with pinpoint accuracy. Markham crossed his arms. What? You think I'm gonna reward you for seed-hogging? He sked, shaking his head in mock disapproval, then immediately pivoted, his expression transforming into a sickeningly sweet smile as 3 familiar figures approached. Matriarch. Aunt Melinda. Maria. He gestured grandly to the now vacated spots. Your excellent seats, as promised. The matriarch sniffed, unimpressed, but sat anyway. Markham's grin didn't waver. Sure, he'd just been blatantly ignored, but at least he'd avoided a public beatdown. Getting humiliated in front of this many people? That was a fate he would rather avoid. Bobby and Rook, now thoroughly demoted to standing room only, exchanged resigned glances. Of course, they didn't have any choice, not like they could do anything about it. That left one spot still open, right beside Melinda. Ethan hesitated, hovering awkwardly at the edge of the row. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.